Welcome to Lunch Break Wisdom, short ideas from the world's most influential books designed for a quiet break between work, a commute home, or a moment to think more clearly. Today's episode explores The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Unlike many religious books that begin with faith and move toward understanding, The Case for Christ starts with skepticism. Lee Strobel was an investigative journalist and legal editor at the Chicago Tribune. By his own account, he approached Christianity with doubt. When his wife became a Christian, Strobel set out to examine the evidence himself, intending to determine whether Christianity's central claims could withstand critical scrutiny. The result was a book that reads less like a sermon and more like an investigation. The central question driving the narrative is simple. Was Jesus who he claimed to be? Strobel structures the book around interviews with historians, theologians, medical experts, archaeologists, and biblical scholars. Together, they address some of the most common questions surrounding Christianity. Was Jesus a real historical figure? Can the New Testament documents be trusted? Did the resurrection actually happen? Could alternative explanations account for the rise of Christianity? Regardless of one's conclusions, the book encourages something valuable: the willingness to investigate deeply rather than rely solely on assumptions. One of the first themes explored is historical reliability. Many people assume that religious texts exist entirely outside historical inquiry. Strobel examines whether the New Testament documents satisfy criteria historians typically use when evaluating ancient sources. Questions emerge. How early were these accounts written? Were eyewitnesses still alive? How many manuscript copies exist? How consistent are those copies? The broader lesson extends beyond Christianity. Important claims deserve investigation. Whether examining historical events, scientific findings, or contemporary news stories, intellectual integrity requires moving beyond slogans toward evidence. Another major theme involves the nature of testimony. In legal settings, eyewitness testimony often plays an important role. Yet, testimony must be evaluated carefully. Was the witness credible? Did multiple witnesses independently corroborate events? Were there motives for deception? Strobel explores these questions regarding the gospel accounts. More broadly, the discussion reminds us that human beings navigate life through various forms of trust. Very few people personally verify every scientific experiment, read every original historical source, or investigate every professional recommendation. Much of life depends upon assessing credibility thoughtfully. The challenge lies in balancing openness with discernment. The book also explores the distinction between possibility and probability. Many events are theoretically possible. The question often becomes which explanation best accounts for the available evidence. This principle applies widely in medicine, in criminal investigations, in business decisions, and in personal relationships. Wisdom involves evaluating competing explanations carefully rather than gravitating immediately toward preferred conclusions. Another fascinating aspect of the book concerns the character of skepticism itself. Strobel demonstrates that skepticism can be constructive. Healthy skepticism asks questions, tests assumptions, examines evidence. However, skepticism can also become selective. Some individuals demand overwhelming evidence for beliefs they dislike while accepting minimal evidence for beliefs they prefer. This tendency affects everyone. People frequently evaluate information through emotional filters, political loyalties, personal experiences, cultural identities. Recognizing these biases requires humility, the willingness to say, I may not be entirely objective. The book also explores the humanity of doubt. Contrary to common assumptions, doubt is not necessarily the opposite of faith. Many religious traditions contain stories of questioning individuals, people who wrestled with uncertainty, who sought reassurance, who struggled to reconcile experience with belief. Doubt, approached honestly, can become a catalyst for deeper understanding rather than an obstacle to it. This principle applies beyond religion. Strong relationships tolerate questions. Healthy organizations welcome feedback. Intellectual maturity permits uncertainty without surrendering curiosity. Another recurring theme involves the search for meaning. Throughout the investigation, readers encounter individuals who describe faith not merely as assent to propositions, but as a framework for understanding identity, purpose, morality, suffering, and hope. Even people who remain unconvinced by Christianity's theological claims may recognize the universality of these questions. Why am I here? What constitutes a meaningful life? How should I treat others? What happens when suffering enters the story? The search for meaning transcends religious boundaries. Another important lesson from the book concerns the limits of certainty. Absolute certainty proves elusive in many domains. Historical inquiry deals with probabilities, scientific understanding evolves, relationships involve trust despite vulnerability. The absence of perfect certainty does not necessarily prevent meaningful commitment. People marry without guarantees, launch businesses amidst uncertainty, pursue dreams despite risks. Human life often involves acting thoughtfully without possessing exhaustive knowledge. The book also raises questions regarding transformation. Strobel describes encountering individuals whose lives appeared profoundly altered through faith. Again, readers may interpret these stories differently. Yet transformation itself remains an important phenomenon. Can people genuinely change? Can resentment become forgiveness? Can addiction give way to recovery? Can fear yield courage? Most people, regardless of worldview, hope that transformation remains possible. The book also explores the relationship between evidence and experience. Evidence matters, reason matters. Yet human beings are more than analytical machines. Relationships, beauty, love, purpose. These dimensions of life involve both objective and subjective elements. Wisdom may involve integrating rational inquiry with emotional honesty rather than privileging one at the expense of the other. Another powerful lesson concerns intellectual courage. Strobel embarked upon an investigation expecting one outcome. He ultimately reached another. Regardless of whether readers agree with his conclusions, the willingness to follow evidence where one believes it leads requires integrity. Changing one's mind is rarely easy. Ego resists revision. Communities sometimes punish dissent, yet growth often requires flexibility. The capacity to say, I was mistaken, or I need to reconsider. Toward the end of the book, Strobel emphasizes decision making. After extensive investigation, individuals must eventually decide how they will respond. Some embrace faith, others remain unconvinced, still others continue exploring. The important point is intentionality. Avoiding questions constitutes a choice. Engaging them thoughtfully constitutes another. Ultimately, the case for Christ is less about winning arguments and more about inviting investigation. It encourages readers not to outsource important questions entirely. to think critically, to explore evidence, to recognize biases, and to approach deeply held beliefs, whether religious or secular, with both humility and rigor. Whether one ultimately accepts Christianity, rejects it, or remains uncertain, the book offers valuable reminders. Ask good questions, pursue truth sincerely, remain open to revision, respect complexity, and recognize that some of life's most important decisions involve not only what we know, but also how we choose to respond to what we discover. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: the pursuit of truth requires courage. Courage to investigate, courage to doubt, courage to believe, and above all, courage to remain honest with ourselves throughout the process. Because meaningful lives are often built not upon inherited assumptions alone, but upon questions examined thoughtfully and convictions embraced intentionally. In summary, key concepts from the case for Chris: 1. Evidence matters. Important claims deserve careful investigation. 2. Healthy skepticism. Question honestly rather than cynically. 3. Credibility assessment. Sources and testimony should be evaluated thoughtfully. 4. Meaning transcends certainty. Life often requires decisions amidst uncertainty. 5. Transformation is possible. People possess the capacity for profound change. 6. Intellectual humility. Remain willing to revise conclusions. 7. Intentional exploration. Avoiding important questions is itself a choice. Everyday takeaways for you. Investigate before forming strong opinions. Recognize your own biases and blind spots. Stay curious, even when certainty feels elusive. Allow room for complexity in important discussions. Pursue truth with both reason and humility. Remain open to personal growth and transformation. What books have challenged your assumptions about faith, meaning, or truth? Share your recommendations for future Lunch Break Wisdom episodes below. Please subscribe and comment.